Okie dokie. So today we're talking about the land transition, which I'm going to argue is like one of the most important things that happens in vertebrate evolution. Everything you guys have seen so far that I think we would call a vertebrate, at least in our lecture series, has been something you'd probably refer to as some kind of fish. And I actually would argue that everything on this slide up here in this swampy, flooded, foresty habitat is one way or another basically a kind of fish. I heard some of you saying before class there's like a crocodile looking thing over there. That's one of these early tetrapodomorph fish. And I kind of agree with you. It does look a little bit crocodile and there's a good reason for that. It's a four-legged animal living in the water, kind of what crocodiles are doing today. But this is a painting meant to represent the Devonian. So we don't have anything that's a reptile or even an amphibian or a mammal yet in Earth history, which is really cool, at least the clays that you guys know. And so fossils, a couple of times, really become some of the most important pieces of scientific evidence we have to understand the world. And I'm going to argue this is one of those times. You can look at all the fishes that are alive today and all the animals with legs that are alive today, and from their DNA or from their proteins or whatever you want, you can infer their relationships. But it is sort of weird to imagine what is it like when the first fishes are like coming out of the water. Let's go look. And then fossils can show you a lot of details about how that probably happened. That's really, really, really powerful evidence. So this is a really cool one. Also, we're going to talk about that clade up there, Osteichthyes, the bony fish. You guys are all Osteichthyes. So just to kind of refresh you on your fishiness, this is where we kind of left off last week on Thursday. You guys met some of these like early jawed vertebrates. So part of the Gnathostomata total group, they have jaws. But that's different than the Gnathostomata crown group. This is only important because everything inside of it is bracketed by living things, but the jaw thing happens back here, right? So that's kind of cool. And you met the placoderms, the big armored fishes. And for like one horribly short second, I forced you to look at acanthodians. And unfortunately for acanthodians, another paraphyletic group of these fishes, some of which are related to today's cartilaginous fishes, that's all the time they're going to get. If one of you wants to do your project on acanthodians, I promise you, you'll have a great time. And you'll be the only one that talks about them ever again in this class, because I have to stop. Okay. I want to give you, this was what we were supposed to get to on Thursday. We're going to do this real quick. A couple of characters, a couple of synapomorphies that unite all the cartilaginous fishes of today. So all these animals you've met down here, these jawless stem gnathostomes, these living and stem cyclostomes, a lot of these placoderms, their endoskeletons, the parts of their vertebrae and fins inside their bodies, are made out of cartilage. But today we really only talk about these fishes as like the cartilaginous fishes. They actually have a couple of very important details that totally separates their cartilagey bodies from the inherited cartilagey bodies that everybody got, if that makes sense. So let me show you those two characters real quick so we can get into the bony stuff. So here's my Chondrichthyan characters for you guys. One is a prismatic calcified cartilage. So there is a very awesome shark skeleton hanging up there in that museum. Sharks, you guys probably know, have cartilage skeletons. They still have a skeleton, a skull, a lower jaw, the Meckel's cartilage of the lower jaw, vertebrae, bases to their fins, their fin rays. There are structures within them that are made out of cartilage, but they're still homologous to like the vertebrae you have or the brain case you have. And that's really important. But something that makes it different than just like cartilage like in your nose is that they actually turn their cartilage into like a mineralized form. They have these little teeny like hexagon shaped things called tesserae that all fit together. And they put like mineral deposits in there, just like your bony cells put minerals like calcium down to make your bones. So a shark's skeleton is not like ear cartilage. It's much tougher than that. It has a special name, prismatic calcified cartilage, that I want you guys to know. And that does make it different from a lot of the little cartilage endoskeletons we've seen before. But anyway, that's the name for it. It's a thing that unites the living cartilaginous fishes. And then the other synapomorphy, shared derived feature that only these fishes have, that I care for you to know about, is they have these things called claspers, which I think are super fun. What you're seeing here are the pelvic fins. So remember, it's only the gnathostomes that have pectoral fins in the front and pelvic fins in the back. And on the pelvic fins of male chondrichthyans, there's this extension, and there's this thing called claspers, and they use it for internal fertilization. So both of these sexes of chondrichthyine fishes have like a slit down like for, I don't know if it's actually called a cloaca in these guys or not, but don't worry about that. But for reproduction, that depending on which side the mating process is happening from, he will curl that pelvic fin clasper up into the genital slit of the female chondrichthyine. And so here's some like pajama sharks on the bottom. Here's some reef sharks here. Female chondrichthyines actually have like much thicker skin on their pectoral fins than the males do because during sex, the males have to like hang on, like bite to hold on to each other for this actual process. Why I think this is cool is that we can trace it all the way back through all these different animals. And next time you guys are at an aquarium or something, you can like totally see which is like a shark swims by and you're like, that's a boy shark, that's a girl shark. It's very easy to actually tell. And I think that's a cool thing. You'll remember we saw a placoderm last week that had like an armor shield where like 50% of the boys had, 50% of them have it, 50% of them don't. And we infer that to be male and female. Probably an analogous thing to what we know chondrichthyines are doing in placoderms. But internal fertilization means there's a lot of cool biology, like mate choice and paternity sort of evolutionary constraints. If you're a fish that just broadcasts sperm and egg out into the water, there's a very different reproductive structure than if you're actually like having this level of precision in who's fertilizing who and how it works. So anyway, claspers for you. Enjoy them, look them up. You'll see them in the paleo art as we move through. I'll let you imagine Megalodon. Okay. So chondrichthyines, sharks, quote unquote, are of course not just sharks, but I think the earliest chondrichthyines, the earliest cartilaginous fishes we have in the fossil record, remember back in the Silurian, there are those like little scales. We don't know who they are, but they're little scales, placoid scales. They're the same kind of scales that chondrichthyines have. But up in the Devonian, there's a whole lot of these chondrichthyines. They all, I would say, look pretty sharky. And so there's a lot more to chondrichthyines than just like the animals you guys call sharks. But they show up in the Devonian, and as you well know, an animal swimming around looking something like this has been going on for a very, 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 very long time. We're going to talk about it later this week, but like the evolution of like trees, like plants on the land becoming really huge also happens at about this same time. So you'll see stuff online, people making jokes about sharks are older than trees. It's pretty close. And that's an interesting thing. But of course, we're not talking about the crown clades here. Rare to get good fossils. These are some like really high resolution scans of a fossil where you can see some of the tougher cartilages of the pectoral and pelvic girdles of this little early chondrichthyine called Doliotis. These guys are basically all carnivores, but there are some really, really beautiful fossils from the Devonian. This one's called Cladosalachi. It's probably related to these animals today called ratfishes. We'll talk about them later. But you can see here, pretty messy cartilage preservation there, but really nice pectoral fins. The fin rays of animals like sharks and stingrays are actually a keratin structure, kind of like your fingernails, which is really cool. And so they're preserved really nicely on animals like Cladosalachi here. This animal is one that's been known for quite a long time. And so if you guys end up doing any of your own like paleo art searching, any sort of like Devonian shark probably looks like this. It's based off this animal, Cladosalachi. If you ever Google Dunkleosteus, that big armored fish that we learned about last week, half the time it's got half a Cladosalachi in its mouth because they're found in the same rocks, actually in Ohio, which is kind of fun. But anyway, we were supposed to get to this last Thursday, just to get those chondrichthyines set up for you as we move through the origin of things related to today's sharks and rays. But okay, we're going to go over to the other side of the living gnathostomes for the whole rest of today and go over to these bony fishes. Remember, gnathostomata breaks up into cartilaginous fish today and bony fish today. And these are the osteichthyes, the bony fishes. I've got 3 synapomorphies for you for osteichthyes. And if I come back here, just to remind you where we are, here's our gnathostomata node. Everything past here has a jawed mouth. And there was one side over here to chondrichthyes and one side over here to osteichthyes. I think you put those out there. So again, I'll always try to flip back and forth from like, as biology students, today's animals that you can actually go look at and study in a lot of very specific ways, back to the fossil records. So you can try to like keep yourself on track with matching those up. Again, as we go through, here's your 3 vertebrata synapomorphies, your 8 or 9 gnathostome synapomorphies distributed there. Before we get too hard up into the osteichthyes though, which break up into ray-finned fish, Actinopterygii, and lobe-finned fish, Sarcopterygii, repetition. I wanted you guys to kind of refresh yourselves One of the most important things we can do in this class is like build this phylogeny so that you have an expectation of like the shared nature of different characters. So if I tell you about some new animal, you'll be able to know, oh, it's supposed to have all of this stuff because it's been inheriting through evolution different stages, different synapomorphies along the way. So I've given you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters that unite all the crown nathostomes. Everything over here has a bunch of stuff that's shared, and then everything we've already met has some amount of it, but not all of it. And so just to stop me from just blabbing this whole time, there they are. Oop. Would you do me a favor and talk to your neighbors and remind yourselves of which ones are which? And so what are these two? What's that one? And what does it mean for all these animals in between? Give you a few minutes. Look at your own notes. Tell me about it.
The most recent ones. Here we go. There's my one is armor, right? Yeah. Or like the no, the most. Oh, you're right. I think that's this is some like for that. Some of the first one structures, see most
Who's feeling like, which group I should say, is feeling confident about like these three that unite Osteichthyes, little jawless guys, with all the true jawed nathostomes? What are these three? Yeah, Trevor.
Is one of them paired fin structures?
And what are those paired fin structures?
It's the
Anybody else? Yeah, the pectoral fins.
Yes.
So these guys have pectoral fins. That's it in terms of their paired structures. What about the other two for this node? Yeah, Carmen. Dorsal fin for sure. Big dorsal fin on the top here. Some of these animals have little fun things happening, but we think those are convergently involved. This is a dorsal fin that is inferred to be very much homologous with the dorsal fins you're seeing all over the place, fins on the back of the animals everywhere else. What's the last one? Here you go. Heterocircle tail, a tail where the vertebrae go up to the dorsal lobe of the tail. There's a ventral lobe of the tail that's supported in some way, usually by like some kind of fin ray structure, but the vertebrae go up. So look at these heterocircle tails. All inherited from a common ancestor that they share with Osteichthyes before anybody evolves jaws. Okay, cool. Here they all are. Make sure you agree with this. Read them. Talk to your neighbors. Did you get distracted and say something like sensory shields or armor or something like that? Because though I did give you features for some of the other clades throughout, but those are the ones that are shared, what we can expect any nathostome to have with all this kind of stuff. Or if it doesn't have it, I have a question, and probably a cool question. So go ahead and just read those together. Make sure you agree that those are how they line up. Can someone remind us what three semicircular canals is? Somebody hasn't said anything yet? Yeah, Brooklyn.
Ear canal stuff for
Yeah, ear canal stuff, I agree. And what's interesting about them?
sense of balance.
Sense of balance. So there's fluid in three different canals that all loop in like a different direction. You can imagine like XYZ coordinate space. And so if you have an awareness of yourself in three-dimensional space, we can infer that you're probably much more able to navigate in three-dimensional space. And so the gnathostomes, these guys all doing different kinds of probably very interesting feeding, but it's probably relatively passive, like sifting stuff and things like that. These organisms maybe are using their jaws, maybe, for like actual specific prey capture, prey pursuit. And so they have this interesting feature we can see in their brains, and their inner ears, I should say, that are really, really closely associated with their brains, that we can infer is helping them navigate through the water. They have more fins, more ability to move in different ways, specific ways. So these things all kind of complement each other in a really nice way. Again, the point we're going to make today about this group, the tetrapod fishes, we can make right here for all the gnathostomes. Fossils let us know that like a lateral line system comes before a dorsal fin, comes before jaws, which come before true teeth. That's cool. If all you have are lampreys and hagfishes today, and then a bunch of sharks and tetrapods, how do you know the sharks and tetrapods have all these things they share? How do those things evolve? It's just very cool to me that fossils can help us understand, then come up with these ecological and evolutionary scenarios for hypothesizing about how and when the body would have come together. Pectoral fins come before pelvic fins. I don't know if that's really, really important or not, but I think it's very cool that we have that well grounded. And that's kind of one of the things we're going to do today up there in the tetrapods. All right, thank you for indulging me. I gave you a couple chondrichthyan snapemorphies. Hang on to those. Now let's give you those osteichthyan snapemorphies, things that unite snapemorphies, shared or derived features that unite all the osteichthyans, these bony fishes. Number one, LOL, bony fishes have true bone. And what I mean by that is like an endochondral internal skeleton. This is one of the last times you're going to hear me blabber about this to you guys. But this is very cool. Having like bones inside your body that are calcified into a structure called bone, your vertebrae, your appendages, like we learned about yesterday, this is an osteichthyan thing. Sharks and living cyclostomes like lampreys have things in their bodies that are made of cartilage that are homologous to what you have, but yours are made out of bone. And this bony internal skeleton is an osteichthyan synapomorphy. And so what I'm talking about are these blue bones here on this silly cartoon, talking about endochondral ossification. Bone from the skin is very ancient, but bone, meaning a preformed bone in cartilage, endochondral bone, that then becomes bone as the organism grows up, is what is unique to these organisms and us. If I show you this, here is like a fetus specimen of a human, and you can see the very different style of bone formation in the skull. So these are ancient dermal bones that are shared with some of the like armored fishes in terms of how they develop. But the rest of the skeleton down here, except for the clavicle, is this endochondral style of ossification. You guys saw these cartoons yesterday in lab, right? A bony collar that starts at the middle of this cartilage rod and then fills out slowly to become bone. This is a very different way of forming that same type of hard tissue than this. This frontal bone, this humerus bone, they're both in the same individual. They're formed in different ways. And so that's very, very, very cool. If we look at something like this fossil of a beautiful osteichthyan, a fish, I think you'll all agree, we can see kind of the same types of patterns. There's an endochondral skeleton in the axial and appendicular parts of the body, but those skull bones, especially the exterior ones, are that same dermal type of bone formation. And so again here, even like a fish or a human, you can see sort of echoes of those like very early vertebrates from the Paleozoic. Armored heads, cartilaginous bodies, and then these ones turn their cartilaginous bodies into bony bodies internally. Super fun, super cool. So bone, like I've told you about 100 times now, is a really, really, really important tissue. And thankfully for all osteichthyans, so that's most of your fishes today, all of your amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, they have this structure that we call bone. Bone is a living thing that's full of living cells with nerves and blood vessels that can bring nutrients and take away waste. And bone all throughout the life of an organism is remodeling and growing. It can repair itself. And so therefore is a really, really, really wonderful way to interrogate the lives of extinct organisms. So bone, 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 we really can do that and know a lot of things about Osteichthyes animals that are really hard to know, even from good fossils of like a chondrichthyon or a cyclostome, one of the jawless fishes. That's pretty cool. All right. The character you just got, the character I want you to have is that bony internal skeleton, the endochondral skeleton. That's one of my Osteichthyes characters for you guys. The other one is very, very, very much related to that. It's a bone feature. And what it is those dermal bones, which are again much more ancient, some of the placoderms have these bones, are where the teeth are actually supported. And that's new, right? The sharks that we just talked about, they have teeth, but they have teeth on their cartilages, things like the Meckel's cartilage or the palatal quadrate cartilage. In Osteichthyes, the teeth are actually rooted in the bones. And so there's three bones you guys know that most of us have, a premaxilla, a maxilla, and a dentary. And here's a fish, this bony fish, a gar. And here's an iguana. They have homologously those three bones, dermal ossifications with teeth anchored in them with sockets and everything like that. So an endochondral internal skeleton is an Osteichthyes feature. Dermal bones, those three, maxilla, premax, dentary, the most important, being the things that support the teeth, that's also an Osteichthyes feature. And then the last one I have for you is so hilarious and so different, and it's really important for today, but I don't have very many fossils to show you. It's something we can infer from living animals' comparative anatomy. Instead of me explaining it really quick, talk to your neighbors. What do you think I'm about to talk about when you see those two words? Does that make any sense at all to you? Just chat about it for a second. All right, so let's just start with what do we think a foregut might be? Above the stomach. So before and anterior to something, before the foregut. And so you guys can think about the simplest of all the bilaterians, all these little early chordates, a lot of these little early vertebrates. It's a tube, right? A mouth and an anus, and they're connected, and it's not that complicated in between. The whole structure, endoderm lined, is like the gut. And in the foregut, the front of it, there's a diversion, a diverticulum. This is showing the evolution, sorry, not evolution really, development in a mammal like us of the lungs. So you have this tube that goes through your body that's for food, but there's a little split off the side of this one, and it makes a little chamber that goes off to the side. And as ontogeny continues, you get a separation between the esophagus and the trachea. They ultimately connect. You guys all know about the Heimlich maneuver, right? There is a connection, for better or for worse, between your food tube and your breathing tube. That's because your breathing tube budded off of your food tube early on when you were developing. That's really cool and lets us know something really important about the way Osteichthyes can really interact with their world. So here's a frog. There's its mouth. There's its throat going down into its stomach. And that front of the gut diversion to its lungs is way up here. You guys have pretty much the same thing. That's really not news to you guys, but what I think is important here is that that feature isn't some like land-living animal feature. Back in Osteichthyes fishes, all Osteichthyes fishes have that diversion to a respiratory chamber off of their gut, off of their food tube. And so even something like a minnow will have a mouth that goes into its stomach, and there's its intestines, and there's its anus. Great. But a minnow today has this foregut diverticulum that goes into this big structure. Most of the fishes we have today use that structure to sort of help regulate their buoyancy. It's often called a swim bladder. It's called a gas bladder up there. But it is homologous to your lungs. You, on land, bring air into this chamber, and you have a ton of blood vessels in there, and you extract oxygen from the air and put it right into your blood. You then exhale it out. The waste products, the carbon dioxide from your breathing, you can breathe it out. This fish is having no problem breathing underwater with its gills. So it gets the oxygen from the water up here, But then a lot of living fishes today fill this gas bladder with air, and it helps them like stay as deep or shallow as they want to stay in the water column. That seems very, very different, but the structure is exactly the same. And it means some really cool stuff for what we're about to talk about today. Foregut diverticulum is the really specific anatomical term for that diversion. But you guys can basically think of this as lungs. Being able to have a sac where you can respire, where you can get oxygen from the air, is something that all bony fishes have ancestrally. Okay. Most of the fishes we have today have actually changed the function of that away from breathing, we think, to just a buoyancy regulator because they're breathing with their gills. But having this be an ancient feature shared by animals like this might be really surprising. But there's a bunch of really cool fossil stuff and some living vertebrate stuff I'll be able to show you. Many, many, many Osteichthyes today, here's that swim bladder again on a trout, come up to the surface and gulp air. Some of them use it as a way to live in low oxygen conditions. Some of them use it as a way to complement the totally fine amount of air they're getting, not air, oxygen they're getting from their gills. But this great big fish down here in Florida, anytime it wants, can come up to the surface. All of these bubbles right here are it exhaling to take another breath. So it's exhaling, they're coming out of its gills, like, and then it sucks in air up there in its mouth. Here's another living Osteichthyes, one of our cousins, a lungfish, called a lungfish, famously, because they come up and go, and that's really how they do their respiring. The common ancestor, I have this with an exclamation point up here because I think it's crazy, of bony fishes, so something like a trout, has gills, which are part of this structure way up front, and a chamber off of its gut, we infer, could have been able to actually take in air and get oxygen from the air. That's cool. That's from living diversity. We can make that inference. And then, of course, we can check fossils and see a bunch of other really cool stuff. Is this making sense? I love this so much because it's such a surprise, if you've never heard of it before. So just to refresh, gnathostomes, chondrichthyes on one side, Osteichthyes on the other side. There's your two chondrichthyine characters, the prismatic calcified cartilage and the claspers. And then there's your three Osteichthyes characters, a bony internal skeleton, premax max dennary hosting teeth, breathing with a lung structure, butted off a foregut diverticulum. Your three snape ovaries for all these bony fishes up there. Okay. Now let's do a little bit of fun like biodiversity. Actinopterygii today is one side of the Osteichthyes. These are the ray-finned fishes. The other side, of course, is our side, the lobe-finned fish side of Osteichthyes. So if I go back there, these are all living actinopterygians, ray-finned fishes. Almost half of every single vertebrate species alive right now is an actinopterygian bony fish, a ray-finned bony fish. Their early fossil record, really tough. And so here's a whole bunch of these like little early fishes. Mostly tiny. Some are a little bit more medium-sized. You can see they have these awesome heterocircle tails. They got their teeth on their dennary, their maxilla, these things we've been talking about today. These do invade freshwater environments in the Devonian, but again, most of them are in marine situations, which is where almost all the vertebrates we've seen so far have been. Something that I think is really important, and we'll come back to it later in class, is that the living groups of actinopterygians today split. The crown group of just Actinopterygii splits way back here in this Devonian period. So there's a lineage of fishes today, not very many, little freshwater guys that live in Africa. Although if you go to the pet store in Pocatello, they do have these, which is cool. They're called beeshears or reed fishes. They are the only remaining living members of this clade that diverged from all the other Actinopterygians way back in the Devonian, 350 something million years ago. Really, really fun. But the crown divergence, the crown diversity of Actinopterygians goes all the way back to almost the oldest Actinopterygians, period. I think that's pretty cool. Fun little guys. We'll talk a lot more about Actinopterygians later, but their early record is like pretty scant for how important they are now. These are not ecologically or biodiversity-wise the most common or abundant fishes at all back in the Devonian, this age of fishes. They're there. They're kind of just always around. But okay, now let's get into the stuff we really want to do today, up into those sarcopterygians. I have one synapomorphy that unites the sarcopterygians. So this clade, to the exclusion of the other ones, has this feature. It has evolved. It is called the monobasal. You're looking at a phylogeny here. Here's a bunch of actinopterygians. This is their pectoral fins. And then here's some sarcopterygians. You guys, although this is a frog. Lungfish and coelacanths. Sister to all the Osteichthyes. Out here is the pectoral fin of a chondrichthyan. Talk to your neighbors for a second. Make some observations about these pectoral fins, or forelimbs rather, maybe for the tetrapod. What seems different about the sarcopterygians?
Goes from one bone to multiple bones, is that the idea? Like your center bone to your finger structure? That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. Yeah, that goes one bone to a branch off. Probably.
And then you could just.
That's what it's not.
All right, anything seem interesting or different about the sarcopterygians? Yeah, Brooklyn.
Noticing more of a central bone structure. The thinner limb.
What do you mean by central bone structure? Just so I don't put words in your mouth.
Like the coelacanth in particular has
Okay.
all those single bones leading together.
A bunch of like a line of bones. Lungfish for sure, right? Kind of has something going like that. Anybody else? What were you going to say, Trevor?
Well, I was gonna say, like, it seems like the sarcopterygians are more streamlined, whereas the whatever and the
No, give it a shot. The act what?
actino
Actinopterygians.
actinopterygians.
Yep.
The
Neopterygians.
neopterygians, their fins are more like fanned out.
More fanned out. I think you'll agree that like the shark's fin up here and then these actinop fins here, they kind of have this splay to them. I don't think that's an incorrect thing to observe. I think there's a lot of maybe complexity here. So I'll tell you guys that the way developmental biologists and anatomists can talk about fish fins is that you can imagine, like, for instance, like here's this gar. It has tons of bones proximally within that pectoral fin. And there's names developmentally. You might have 8, you might have 2. There's names developmentally for these different bones. The proximal most bones in the pectoral fin, the ones that articulate with the pectoral girdle, because there is a pectoral girdle there in all these animals, are called basals. And then there's other names for the ones that are increasingly distal. But there's a lot of basals, a lot of basals, a lot of basals. The sarcopterygians have one single, it's this thing right here actually, this one. One single basal, one single bony element that articulates with the pectoral girdle. And that monobasal is, here it is in a coelacanth, the proximal part of the pectoral fin. And then there's some other bones down here. The lungfish, proximal bone all by itself, only one that attaches to the pectoral girdle. Those of you who are like squinting at the little labels there, I'm talking about this bone. A coelacanth has one basal, that basal is homologous. A lungfish has one bone, that bone is homologous to your humerus. These animals have a little humerus in their pectoral fins. And we can look at that through developmental biology and see, in fact, that it totally is developmentally consistent with your tetrapod humerus. Isn't that fun? How do you like that name? Or that name? And then there's this other stuff where you're like, what is that one? It's like, oh, don't worry about it. Your clade loses all that stuff. But there are pieces of the fins of like a coelacanth that, again, through developmental biology, we can identify as like that one bone way down there is probably high evidence, high confidence, the radius. And the one over there is the ulna. And there's a couple other ones in between. But it's still developmentally homologous to what you end up having. This one's called the intermedium because it's between the ones that we really care about, right? We made up the names. We made up the labels. but a humerus and radius in ulna, things like that happening. A fused radial ulna in lungfish. We're not going to worry about that. The only character I want you guys to have, the only synapomorphy I want you to have for sarcopterygians is the humerus part, the monobasal, one fin bone at the base. And this is in the pectoral fins, right? I think that's fun. So here's a nice diversity slide for your kind of mostly focusing on the Devonian right now. Sarcopterygians. There's 3 lineages of sarcopterygians: lungfishes, coelacanths, and tetrapodomorphs. So tetrapodomorphs are us tetrapods and our relatives. Talk to your neighbors, make some observations about these fun fishes. I love them. I think they're cool.
That's a short movie. And there is it the same? Two spikes in left with no back then? Against 2 doors and what did they call it? The high meteor, yeah. Have 2 close. Like that's just all of them. Is it all day? Oh, maybe it's not. Like that's just a lot.
So this is Osteichthyes' skull right here. I like it because I'm like, it's not, I don't know what the vibe is, but it doesn't feel super fishy to me. Big maxilla, big dentary. One of my favorite factoids about these fishes is that they are very common in freshwater systems. Interesting. They all have fins that are swimming around, fishy fishies. This is Osteichthyes' body. Heterocircle tail fin, pelvic pectoral, 2 dorsals. Very cool. Fine, fine, fine. Here's the face. Great. When you look at the Devonian, some of the big apex predators out in the oceans are those like giant placoderms. If you're going out into the blue, there's big scary monster armor head fishes out there. If you come into like green and brown lakes and streams, almost all the big predators are tetrapodomorph fishes, which I think is pretty fun. Here's Hyneria here. This is from a documentary from like 27 years ago. Got a shark. It's just like nice. These are our cousins. They're not particularly close to coelacanths or lungfishes. These ones down here, these 4 on the bottom, are tetrapodomorph fishes. So stem tetrapods, even though they're obviously swimming around and obviously fishes. I think that's really cool. A lot of fun ecological stuff here. If this is exciting to you, go Google and then maybe you'll do your project. So here's a whole bunch of reconstructions, not all by the same artist, but close, of different Devonian sarcopterygians. Tell me about these fishes. Talk to each other. What are you noticing? What seems cool? What seems interesting?
Yeah, just like your rebranding. It's still just big.
So.
Yeah.
All right, what are some cool observations people are making? They all, oh yeah, a lot of double dorsals, right? 2 dorsal fins on a lot of them, even if it's way back here. Maybe, yeah, I think so. 2 dorsals, what else?
I'm just gonna say a lot of fins in general.
Very finny, right? So everybody's got 2 pectoral, 2 pelvic. We haven't talked about this yet, even once in this class, but this is a midline fin on the bottom. A lot of gnathostomes have it. It's called the anal fin. It's kind of like the dorsal fin for the bottom, but there's like 2 and 2, and then 1 in the middle, a couple on the top. Yes, Carly? What do you mean by different jaws? Big time, I would say. Lots of different faces. Is not, right? That's cool. So a lot of ways that even modern day ichthyologists get after questions of fish evolution is like jaw mechanics and jaw function. It's one of the best ways that you can infer these animals like ecological positions, body size maybe, and then what are their jaws doing? What are their teeth doing? Cool. Which one is our cousin? Because only one of them is, of all of them up there, one of them is closer to us than the rest. So which one's the tetrapod relative closest? Okay, go ahead.
But all the other Christians, I say, he's like greater. Yeah.
Which is very good. Yeah.
This is the most. It's like a guard. Let's go. Like this stuff.
We got any favorites? And of course, I really only care about why you're saying it. I don't care which one you pick. Okay, Brooklyn, what's up? This one?
Yeah.
Other people like this one? Okay, and why?
It just seems more like it'd be on land. It's flatter. It looks like it'd be crawling on land. I don't know.
Do we like this animal? Do we want to hold this animal? Okay, yeah, Trevor.
I think the one that we're closest to is the one at the top of the tree to the right. That one.
This one?
Yeah, that one.
This one? How come?
Oh, gosh. I have words in my brain. It's just hard to like explain. Like,
That's why we're here.
the front like fins of the animal.
The pectoral fins, I'm assuming you mean? What?
Those look like they're pretty well muscled, and like if it like got on land, not that it's a land-based animal.
None of these are comfortably on land, just to be clear. But okay. Anybody else have a candidate? Okay. Just so you know, there's lots of nerd terms. I was gonna say names, and I said terms. Lots of terms. Lots of names that, of course, exist. Sarcopterygii can be broken up into Actinistia and Ripidistia. You don't have to know these. Ripidistia can be broken up into Dipnomorpha and Tetrapodomorpha. Now you're getting closer. There's your answer. Sorry, it's purple fins up there. That's an animal called Eusthenopteron. That of these 7, right? I just picked 7 to make a point about Sarcopterygian diversity. But of these 7, this one, which name is Eusthenopteron, is the one that is the closest relative of tetrapods. This one is the one that's the closest relative of the living lungfish. And this one is the closest relative of the living coelacanths, which is really fun. So big, scary coelacanth relative, right? I mean, come on, that's awesome. Fun, funky lungfish relative. This thing's not even, are you kidding me? This is just a fish? I love that. It's a tetrapodomorph fish, and I agree, it's kind of flat and looks like it's going to get you, but it is not the thing actually related to animals like later tetrapods. It's this one here, Eusthenopteron. Fun. Thanks for playing. So here's a bunch more of those animals spread out a little bit. So we have one representative from the coelacanth clade, one representative from the lungfish clade, and then here's those other tetrapodomorph fishes you've seen. And eventually somewhere over here, we're getting to be a little bit less tetrapodomorph and a little bit more true tetrapod. And so we're going to try to get through this today and talk about this transition, because these fishes here are hilariously important to people. They get their own PBS series, they get their own book covers. These are cool fishes showing us this transition. So remember that I can put on this actinoph and this chondrichthyon and still do like this, right? All these animals over here are tetrapodomorphs, they're Ripidistions, they're Sarcops, they're Osteichthyes, they're Gnathostomes. And they share increasingly similar stuff as you go this way, but increasingly ancient stuff going that way. Cool. So if we're going to talk about a fish, maybe like these ones here, transitioning from living a life All biology from life, from birth till death, contained to water systems. Maybe it's freshwater, maybe it's saltwater, but you're living in the water and you're going to live on land now. I'm going to ask you guys to talk to your neighbors here for a few minutes. What are the changes we can expect to see? Again, this is the benefit of something like a scientific approach. We can come up with all these ideas that are probably going to be good ideas and then argue about them and then look for evidence that supports or doesn't support the ideas we just put forward. So if you're imagining, like any Saturday morning cartoon can do, what it's like to be the first fishes out flopping around, what are these challenges going to be? So talk to each other. We'll spend a few minutes on this.
Physics. Yeah, that was gonna be my next one, was, like, water. Some water, in the water, water, some down.
Yeah, I'm a human just.
For the first, it was just a water. Yeah, using more so that it's not really oxygen. And so, as a build.
I have worked with these hydrogen water systems. And so it is like.
Your voice.
Not too hard.
Also need some things. Probably, yeah, so.
But also just like they step in other words. Yeah.
I don't know how to.
More about breathing, like you're adjusting to.
That's the reason.
Composition.
Yeah. They're also going to bring the bottle from the jar. They're concerned about it here about. It's like, we're.
Not.
Water consent.
It's like you were supposed to, like, the first water. Like if you're taking talent, just like, but it's obviously the need for less days there.
Right.
I guess it was needed.
Since it does function.
Make sure.
You didn't talk about it, but it's-
And.
That's what this is. Like, as soon as there was.
Yeah.
All right, what are some ideas we're having for just challenges? There's a lot of them. Get some groups to tell us some. Climate? What do you mean? Who said climate? Oh, you did. I was like, what's climate? What do you mean? Yeah, but what do you mean? I mean, I totally agree climate's a factor, but like, I mean, if I'm a fish living in the Arctic or a fish living in the tropics, climate's a thing to me too. So what do you mean about living on land and climate? People agree or disagree with this? Water is a hilariously good insulator. Like the water temperature might be cold, but it's like not going to get colder or hotter very easily. So you're going from an environment that's relatively stable for maybe something as basic as like temperature to an environment that has like daily swings, seasonal swings in temperature. Okay, so like I'm going to say, I'm just going to distill that to one thing. So temperature variability is kind of probably a new thing. There are plenty of fishes that can live in Arctic waters or tropical waters and individual fishes that go between and they change their physiology. They still have to swim there for 5 weeks. This is like night and day could be different. All right, what else? Yeah.
We kind of glossed over this in our group, but physics, so.
What do you mean by physics?
Gravity mainly.
Gravity.
Water is highly supportive. On land, it's all you.
Yes. I'm sure you've all seen sharks and fishes and yes, even whales on the beach. It's not good, right? So gravity is gonna be something you suddenly have to contend with. You're not neutrally buoyant anymore. Your whole habitat, you're neutrally buoyant. Now you're not. You are feeling the effects of gravity. There's still gravity in the water, right? Okay, anyway. Yeah.
Sensory.
Like, what do you mean?
You have a lateral line system, that isn't gonna work in the air as well.
All of these stem gnathostomes, all the way up through here, have the ability to sense movement near them. And so they have this like tactile system kind of like radiating out from them. Not really, but like they can feel movement because the water they're in is more viscous than air, so they can feel movement in that water really easily. So the sensory system, something like if I just had my like eyes shut and earmuffs on and all this, and you guys would run past me, like I don't know how well I can like detect that, right? So that's an interesting one. So like the lateral line isn't gonna work. What else is a sensory thing? Yeah, go ahead.
Smell?
Yeah, so what do you mean? What's the difference?
Different things in water, air.
Water and air are just different mediums. So using your sense of smell, how good your nose has to be in the water versus in the air, how long a chemical signal might travel in that water versus the air, really different. Okay. What else, sensory wise? Yeah, what about vision? People travel around the world to go scuba dive in a place that has like 100 or 200 feet of visibility. I can go outside right now and look at mountains that are many, many, many tens of miles away from me because air is much different as a visual medium than water. Most water, you can't actually see all that far. Okay. And there's that kind of stuff too. Refractive color works differently, right? Okay, what else? It doesn't have to be sensory. We can take other things now. Obviously, you guys can be like touch, taste, hearing. No one said hearing, but that's a good one. Yeah, Trevor.
So if you're gonna be on land, you need some kind of support structure to make sure you're not like dragging your vital organs on the floor. You know what I mean? Like,
I do know what
get some legs, like slowly develop some kind of legs or something to.
So there's like, you're talking about like protect your organs.
Yeah.
I'm also gonna say this is a factor. This isn't a very clean list, by the way. I'm just writing up what you guys said. But like there's the things that are gonna get adapted, there's the challenges to overcome. I'm gonna say you can swing your tail all you want once you get beached, but like that's not gonna work so well, right? So some sort of support structure, yeah, protect your organs, but also a support structure for like holding your body weight, moving your body around in that place where you're not neutrally buoyant and you are experiencing a lot more gravity. Indigo, what were you gonna say? Ooh, find food. So tell me more. What do you mean?
But, I'm sure floating around trying to eat them is not the best.
So you're gonna have to change probably all kinds of ways that you're gonna find your food, catch your food, process your food. Not a lot, not zero either, but not a lot of like filter feeders up in the air. Whereas if you're like a shark that can just swim through the water with your mouth open real wide, you're just gonna run into food. That doesn't work so often on land. You gotta kind of be a little more catchy with your food source. And that same thing for all these senses with like detecting your food. How well does electrosensory work on land? How well does it work in water? Oh, pretty good. So plenty of sharks, plenty of fishes have the ability to like use electricity, electromagnetic fields to sense things. Not very common for food capture anyway on land. What other things? Yeah, called
Respiration.
respiration. So tell me about that.
Or if it stays wet.
Oh, so you're comboing that. How you're breathing, first off, how you're getting oxygen. When I say breathing, how you're oxygenating your blood. So you can be using your gills underwater to get it dissolved oxygen out of the water. But on land, you have to figure out how to get the oxygen out of the air, a little bit different. And then you're talking about a trade-off where like, if I need to like breathe all the time, I also need to like not dry out. So something desiccates if it like dries out. So you probably can think of a couple tetrapods today, like ribbit type tetrapods, that don't love to be really far away from water because their skin and their organs, they dry out. So they have to be pretty close to the water. They keep themselves literally wet all the time, even though they can go up on land. So these are all interesting challenges, interesting ideas. Anybody else have any more? I mean, there's a lot. We could keep going, of course. Yeah, Trevor.
The development of, nostrils that like might help you be able to breathe better on land instead of like opposed to like the water, like I'm trying to think, oh, but we already did that.
Well, no, we already did it. You're talking about so this is why this list is like, what are the challenges? But you're talking about adaptations that might meet those challenges, right? Plenty of organisms have adapted to live a terrestrial life. It's not just vertebrates. Lots of stuff was up here already when we flopped up. And everybody has to deal with respiration. So one way to do that right is how you're bringing in air into your body, for sure. Here's a nice list of some things I think are important. How you're supporting yourself, how you're moving, definitely how you're breathing. Here's a whole bunch of other ones I thought about. I'm putting the ones in bold up there because we'll kind of focus on those. But there's many more than just this. You guys kind of talked about this. We started with the climate one, which I really thought was that's a fun thing to do. That heat capacity around you, like the water, yeah, fishes are cold, but like so's the water, so they're like homeostatic with the water. It's pretty okay to be a fish. Anyway, very cool. Fun things to think about. It should prompt our ideas of what we should expect to see in these animals. So here are a bunch of these early animals. You've already seen them, but Eusthenopteron is a real thing. Pandorictes is a real thing. Tiktaalik is a real thing. These aren't theoretical animals. These are the real things we find that have real anatomy. Relatively younger going through time, 384, 380, 375, although you'll notice Eusthenopteron exists way past Tiktaalik existing. So it's not like it's like this one turns into this one. It's not how it works. But these can act as like little stand-ins to help us understand. Just make some observations about these fishes, thinking about these challenges that you guys articulated. What are some things you can see in their anatomies that are maybe starting to get to some of what we're talking about? All right, go ahead and do that for a second.
That was really fun and it's very interesting. Very, at least in my opinion. That's okay. Sounds like like full ways. If it has they don't have enough things and yeah. Rather like zero well, you're right. This is the way I those are the that's I'm supposed to go to. No, it's not. There's definitely different. Or even see like it also very strong. Actually, that like that's not holy, right? So it was
All right, so what are some observations you guys can make that kind of look like they might be addressing some of the challenges, maybe?
What was that? Sorry.
Just any observations you're making that might tie into one of these or two of these or whatever. I don't know. A framework for thinking about it. Yeah, you can go.
I thought the jaw structure was kind of interesting.
So what do you mean?
Kind of like curving up the bottom dentary bone versus like the rest of them looks really flat. That's like super curved upwards.
Okay, so curved up lower jaw. I see that. Maybe that has to do with like how it's getting food or processing food. Yeah. What else? Yeah, Trevor.
Tiktaalik, he doesn't have like true legs yet, but like
no, none of I don't think any of these animals have what I would call a limb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, but like Tiktaalik, it's like he's getting there. He's not like flying what he has like.
But this is the fun. I know what you're saying. There's pieces here that you can recognize. But what I think is always really fun and important for you guys to remember is that all these animals, when they're alive, are not like trying to become anything else, right? They are very well adapted to what they're doing. And so, dare I say, she has a fin that, you know, has things that are familiar, right? Probably this animal's pectoral fin is better at producing force, maybe on the bottom of the water column, maybe like on the bottom of the lake, maybe a little bit on land, than this one is. I mean, I bet that's true. Yeah.
Especially in the place of the eye sockets.
Yeah, tell me about the eyeballs. Tiktaalik got like eyes up on top. There's another animal called Ventostega that was only found a few years ago that's related to Tiktaalik, and its eyes are like elevated up like hippopotamus eyes, like they're almost like up way above the skull, so that it could like come up and have its eyeballs out. And it's one of these tetrapodomorph fishes. It's not a tetrapod. So that's cool. Yeah, Brooklyn.
There's that thicker bone, shoulder area on TikTok.
There's this like shoulder area in Tiktaalik. What do you guys think about the shoulder area of Panderichthys, the shoulder area of Eusthenopteron? You can't really see it very well, I guess. Yeah. So one of the, I'm going to show it to you in a second. One of the things that made Tiktaalik so cool, there's a bunch, but one of them is like, this is the first tetrapodomorph we know about that like has a neck. That means a separation between the pectoral girdle and the skull. In fishes, an Actinopterygian, a Chondrichthyan, there's like a connection between the gill skeleton and the pectoral girdle. So that little humerus plugs into a scapula, and that scapula is like attached to the gills. But in Tiktaalik, actually there's movement between those two. Interesting. So moving your head around, moving your limbs to do something, freeing your head from that movement. Who knows what the directionality of those evolutionary pressures might have been, but they kind of make sense. Okay, here's another two. You can imagine it's just a continuation. All right, what things are you noticing about these guys? Canthostega and Ichthyostega.
Yeah, there's
Dozens of bones.
so many places, but it's got like. Well,
Pretty chunky.
then she.
Their eyes are bones. Eyes are
You can definitely get it.
Yeah.
At one point. There's those flat. Some of the others.
Interesting.
All right, what are some things? Yeah.
They actually hold themselves up.
They have digits, right? On the pectoral and pelvic fins, I don't feel comfortable calling them that anymore. All of a sudden, when you have like little fingies and little toesies instead of fin rays at the end, I'm like, I guess I'm going to start calling that a limb. An animal like Tiktaalik is so cool because it's got a lot of these proximal limb bones. Somewhere in here, you're going to get bones that become carpals and metacarpals, but they're not labeled as such for you guys, at least on this figure. But they're still totally like fishy fin rays. When you get to Canthostega and Ichthyostega, we don't have evidence for those fin rays. And in fact, there's little bones that certainly seem to be little digits. Canthostega's got 8 fingers on its hand. Ichthyostega's got 7 toes. It's reconstructed here with 7 fingers, although I don't think the hand of Ichthyostega is really well known. That's why it's not on this reconstruction. But Canthostega's got it. And it's got 8. Is 8 okay? How old are you? 16? That's fun, right? That's cool. That's a different kind of thing than what you guys are having. So think about like the development of these bones, because there's all these other fin rays. There's still weird little pieces in here. Who would predict that like the best early tetrapods we have are 8 fingers, 7 toes? That's cool. What else? Yeah, Trevor.
So, the radius in Acanthostega appears to be smaller than it is in Tiktaalik.
You mean like relatively?
Yeah, relatively.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I see that. So we definitely have eyeballs up on top still. The nostrils are kind of down here. So here's the nares, we would say. So the nares of Ichthyostega and Acanthostega is one is way up here at the very tip. Something that's really important is whatever this is, pelvic girdle. We haven't really talked about pelvic girdles very much. This is a totally endochondral thing. It doesn't have any dermal stuff like your shoulder girdle does because it used to be a gill thing. It's all back here. It's all endochondral. And in these animals, very almost barely in Acanthostega, whereas it's like, oh yeah, for sure, in Ichthyostega, there are those like sacral ribs, those vertebrae that are specialized for articulating with the pelvic girdle. We do have pelvic fins for Tiktaalik. They've actually been described more recently than this figure was made, but they're just like not articulating with the vertebrae yet. They're there. There's a little ilium, but it's not bonily touching the backbone. Acanthostega, Ichthyostega. I like all these fossils because like these are the things you should expect to see. We can talk about, again, the order in which they happen. So I wanted to show you this because I just think it's cool. This is a figure from a paper that has these animals distributed through time. It's trying to show you who's in the ocean, who's in freshwater, who's like almost kind of up near land. And the point I want to make to you guys is animals like Acanthostega, you know, who knows, webbing between all those 8 fingers definitely has a tail fin. Acanthostega has a really robust lateral line on its skull. Nobody thinks Acanthostega is like running around on land. Acanthostega maybe could go on land, but Acanthostega seems to be a very comfortably freshwater tetrapodomorph organism. Maybe you'd even say tetrapod. These animals have variable ecologies, and the timing of the transition isn't like directional. There's coelacanths and lungfish and other tetrapodomorphs this whole time. So it's not like, oh, we're all turned into tetrapods now. No, it only needs 1 lineage, 2 lineages to kind of start to do that. The rest can keep doing what they're doing. Yeah, well. What do you mean? Pectoral fin? Dorsal fins. Oh, yeah, we don't think so. Yeah, because the fossils are pretty good. There's bony pieces of the dorsal fin in like all Sarcopterygians and Echinopterygians, all Osteichthyes. They're just not present. Now, will somebody find a Tiktaalik specimen? You know, there's only a couple in the world. Will somebody find another one that has like the faintest little bit? And then we'd be like, oh, cool, it does have a little on its back. Maybe. But right now, yeah, they're not reconstructed as having dorsal fin. We don't have evidence for a dorsal fin. I wanted you to look at these little ectonops. Look at these 2 Osteichthyes together. Anyway, I want you guys to see this because like this is the ecology that we pretty much think is what Acanthostega's life was. Pretty fishy life, kind of tetrapody anatomy. The other thing that I say about timing, I love this so much. In 2010, a paper came out. No one has yet convincingly like shut it down, but everyone doesn't know what to do with it. This is the timing of these organisms as they're known in the fossil record. From Poland, there's like a trackway fossil that's almost 390 million years old. And everyone's like, oh, so somebody can walk seemingly before we have any really convincing fossils of the walking. The walking sure looks like the walking we would expect. It's just like 15 or 20 million years older than it should be, which again means the fossil record's the best because it can give you something, but not everything. And you can be like, oh, so even if these animals are successfully showing us a transition, they might not literally be involved in that transition at all because they live after it already happened. Do you love it? Do you hate it? I think it's great. Some people are going to get mad. I know this is on YouTube. It's like, some people think this is just dated wrong. If you fix the dating, the rocks suddenly make this old, and it's fine. But maybe. So here's a bunch of synapomorphies that I would put on a tree to talk about the transition from a tetrapodomorphy kind of fish, Eustonopteron, to like a more truly tetrapody looking thing. This is like an early amphibian relative called Tulerpaton. Are these kind of characters? And again, just like we talked about with Gnathostomes, this is like that order of occurrence. They happen at different times. And so like getting down to like 5 digits on your hand happens way after losing your dorsal fin. I think that's cool. So I'm going to put these characters all up on the screen. You guys are going to see them. So if we put these out here, losing your dorsal fin happens pretty early. So Eustonopteron has them. And once we get to Pandorictes, there's really no more evidence for dorsal fins. So that's where we infer that loss. Things like Tiktaalik have a neck. So that means a separation between the pectoral girdle and then the gill structure, the gill covers. Pandorictes, they're connected. Tiktaalik, there's movement between them. I got a whole bunch for Acanthostega and Ichthyostega. These guys really are pretty separate from the rest. And that is manifested by, right, these different synapomorphies that all kind of go right there on the tree. So to put those back into context again, here's your loss of dorsal fin. So you guys will have these on the slides, right? Here's your neck for sure. Once we get to Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, zygapophyses on the vertebrae. Gary taught you in lab about zygapophyses. So on vertebrae, there's a pre-zygapophysis that goes anteriorly and a post-zygapophysis that goes posteriorly. They interact, they lay on each other to support the backbones of tetrapod animals. Fishes don't have those because they're neutrally buoyant in water. But as a support structure for your organs, for your locomoting, those zygapophyses on vertebrae are tetrapodomorph, tetrapod characters. Digits with the loss of fin rays on the paired fins. So pectoral and pelvic fins losing their fin rays, and instead there's digits. A pelvic girdle that has a bony articulation with the actual vertebral column, so becoming a sacrum type structure. That happens in these guys. The pelvic girdle at all, and then yeah, that articulation, that sacral articulation right there. So go back, just make sure. Oh yeah, the pelvic girdle symphysis and the pelvic girdle fused to vertebrae. Sorry, I messed that up. Pelvic girdle symphysis means that the two pubes, the two ischia touch each other on the ventral part of the animal, and then pelvic girdle fused to the vertebrae, forming like a bit of a sacrum. So you can see these across these different animals, which is very cool. But then, if you want to talk about those other two characters, we have to keep adding to the tree. Ichthyostega, of all these animals here, is the closest relative to us. So let's put on the rest of us. I can put on an amphibian here. Here's a nice Permian or Carboniferous animal called Eriops, big old temnospondyle. And it's only in those animals do we start to see other of these true tetrapod characters. And so if we look at the fossils we get from the next period, so the Devonian is followed by the Carboniferous, we have lots and lots and lots of animals we think of as amphibious. And these two characters come in for these animals, these true tetrapods. 5 digits on the hands and feet as the basic condition. This is then the inherited, assumed distribution of digits for all the rest of tetrapods. Amphibians, reptiles, including birds, mammals. The default is 5 until we see you lose them. And we actually usually can watch those losses happen. So you get down to a horse that has 1. But 5 as the base, the inherited base, is down here at tetrapoda. And then finally, the last fin to go is that caudal fin. That tail fin, especially in adult or somatically mature individuals. Some amphibians, I'm sure you know, have cute little tails when they're babies, but they lose them. Do you guys like the idea of like a post-anal tail, a caudal fin, being a chordate synapomorphy that you learned a couple weeks ago? All chordates have a tail fin. And now, once we get up into tetrapods, loss of the tail fin. So it's deeply homologous, and now it's lost. I like that very much. There's a skeleton of Eriops with 5 toes. No evidence for a fin at all on that tail. So to wrap up today, I just want to make these points to you guys. We have fossil record of the Devonian and Carboniferous that's really, really, really good, and almost always is preserving the environment that this transition must have happened in, which is fresh water, swampy, shallow, maybe anoxic type ecosystems. And there are lots of different organisms, lots of different vertebrates we find, including actinops, tetrapodomorphs, lungfishes, all living in the same place. It only takes a little bit for 1 or 2 of these organisms to start playing with breathing air more often, locomoting more often, to get out of the water for a second, to get the evolution of tetrapods. Most of the early tetrapod fossils we find are actually animals that are very clearly living in the water. They have the arms and the legs, they have the eyes on top, but they still look like they spend their time living in the water. That's cool. So it doesn't have to be as harsh as imagining a fishy fish becoming a land animal. It's a very much gradational thing. There are a lot of reasons you might imagine evolutionary forces might encourage 1 or 2 of these lineages to get out of the water sometimes. There's bugs everywhere on land. We're going to talk about that next. You can lay eggs if you leave the stream. A lot of fishes do this today and go to like a little backwater, a little thing that's off the main channel. If you can cross land for a second, your babies can be raised in a nice place. Maybe then you just go back to the main channel, but you still have the adaptations to move over there. Also, in these habitats, oftentimes you have like the drying out of places, whole ponds disappearing. If you're trapped there, you're dead. If you can leave, you don't die. Can everybody imagine natural selection working on a population level to like help out the ones that can make it happen? Many fishes today totally do these things. Fishes that have no legs, they definitely just have fins, walk and crawl and scoot in order to eat or reproduce, or even just to display. A catfish, a perch. Does that look like an animal that should be able to walk around? It does. So it's really not that crazy to imagine that this one kind of does too sometimes, right? I think that's fun. I'll leave you with that. And see you on Thursday.
It's like a chicken.
Okay, I'll see you guys on Thursday.
So,